But yes, in terms there have been calls for the government to secure insurance to allow theatres to get back on their feet and to cover you in the event that there are localized lockdowns again, that we see a second wave. Is that something that you might find particularly useful to you, or is it simply having the package of support for all those freelancers that have fallen through the the support that is currently available?
So I think there's a three-pronged thing that needs to happen, would be my argument. One of which is there needs to be a sum of money which could be in loans and could be about the which enables the industry to start again, because it is that initial thing of capital up front is the problem. There are various ways of doing that. There's a thing called theatre tax relief, which is when we make a show, we can then claim some of the production costs back from the government later on. The film industry have a very similar thing. It could be that we have theatre tax relief, but it's in advance. So you go, well, I'm going to spend this much on the show, and then the government give you that money in advance, and then you don't claim it back later. That's one way of moving money through the system that doesn't really cost the government. It costs them now, but it does, it saves them on a thing they would get back later. There does need to be some kind of bailout, which has to include protected money for freelancers. I think that's 100% the right thing. And then, look, socially distanced theatre just will not work at 2 meters. There is some way it could work at 1 meter. I mean, you're on very tight margins, but it's really, really difficult. I can't see a scenario whereby there isn't, people are not going to take the risk with such tight margins on putting work on if there isn't some kind of insurance guarantee from the government in case there's a second wave. You just can't, you're just not making the kind of money to do that. And I work in the subsidized sector, but if you look at the redundancies that like Cameron McIntosh is looking at making, and this is like, they're on the more hard-nosed end of capitalism than I am, and they are looking at huge redundancies. So when you think about the value of theatre in Britain's power and soft power in the world in terms of commercial exports to Hollywood and so on and so forth, it's like the revenue it makes. It feels like a strange thing where we are genuinely a world leader at a thing to throw that away. You look at the investment Netflix have made, committed to making in the UK in the next 5 years, like over £300 million worth of television to be made here, and that is because of British technicians and British writers and British actors. Like that is why that is. So I can't see. They will get the money back is basically what I think. That's what I think. So I think they should put the money in now, because if you have to build it from scratch, well, other people will step in and build it back. Build it. So.
Thank you. And Piers, do you think there is a wider concern that perhaps, I know that theatre has, by some accounts, been used as a way for the broadcasters, for example, to find talent. I know that Fleabag is a good example of that show was picked up from the stage and it became the winning success that it did. Is that a wider concern for writers that this is going to be an access issue?
Undoubtedly, because it's great that Netflix, as Justin says, is making so much stuff, but I'm afraid writers don't, unless they're incredibly lucky, don't walk into writing 8 seasons of a show for Netflix. Writing's a craft. You have to learn it like everything else, and the majority of writers in this country come up through perhaps being encouraged to write at school and university, and then they might do something on the fringe unpaid, or they might do some kind of community theatre, and then if they're talented, they hopefully get spotted and get given the right opportunities and support. So many writers have benefited from public support in this country, whether it's Phoebe Waller-Bridge or many other people who've become successful, and Andrew Scott, a fantastic actor who's now a star of all sorts of things, beginning his career in the subsidised sector. We simply won't have that talent. Those people won't be discovered. They'll have to make a living, and they will go and get other jobs. This is reality. There's not like they'll be in some alternate universe writing plays. They'll go and work in, I don't know, advertising or other sort of tangential forms of the private creative industries that can employ them. perhaps working in television, but perhaps not as the writers that they might have been. So it's absolutely vital that the government puts in a significant amount of money now to support theatres through this crisis, because I think there's a real concern that what we tend to see happens is once these pathways are shut down, such as what happened in the last century when the repertory theatre system basically ceased to exist, you do choke off ways for people to enter theatre. And for example, one of the reasons we had a sort of domination of people like me, basically sort of upper class white people dominating theatre, was because the ways into it were completely choked off. So unless you had a private education or the kind of support, the privilege came from that, you couldn't get into theatre. And that was beginning to change. And the real concern now is that will just be cut off again, because only people with private support and privileged opportunities will be able to make a living in theatre, because they won't be doing it for money. They'll be unpaid at first. So it's a real issue. The one other thing I would add to what Justin was saying, what we need is, I think theatres need some concrete advice from government, scientific advice that can help us reopen theatres. It's no good just saying theatres are the last buildings to open. We need to know, we now know a lot more about COVID than we did at the start of the lockdown. We need to know exactly what the advice is so we can plan our buildings, plan our productions accordingly. As many people have said, people can sit in airplanes and they can sit in pubs with scientific advice, then perhaps, I'm not saying there has to be safe for everyone, for our audiences and our performers and our staff, but perhaps there is a way. But theatres don't have access to that data or that science. So there's no way we can even begin to plan. We're just completely, as it were, to use a theatrical expression, in the dark.
Yes. Justin, absolutely, we need dates and a timeline.
Yeah.
Is what you need, and also it was interesting talking about the way you finance your productions in the earlier part of the conversation. And actually, are we sort of approaching a particularly important time? I know that pantomime, is this the date that a lot of theatres that rely on pantomime performances are actually going to be, we know this from retail, that they make their sales in a particular period of time before Christmas.
Yeah,
I should have made your timeline comment. Yeah.
I mean, it's 100%. I should have been specific in that. You've hit the nail on the head there, Theo. An awful lot of theatres. I mean, I know this is really, particularly some of our regional theatres, it is like a third of their annual turnover is whether they can do a Christmas show or not. And it's that. The thing is, the way the ecology works, that money goes then into the brilliant work they do with the community group in a hard to reach place like that. That money, it's not that money at the Westbrook Playhouse, or the Leeds Playhouse I should say now, that money I know goes into working with be it refugee groups or they rely on that money so heavily, and it's so important. And then it's not an area that I know a lot about, but I think of the receiving houses, places that only receive work. I know that they're just not in a position to book tours and know what's going on. And that might mean if you live in, Portsmouth, you're not going to have any live performance come to your town for 18 months, because the point is, unless you have, people can't take chances. You need some firm dates and advice, like health and safety advice, so that you can then start to plan accordingly and go, by this date we do this thing and this date we do that thing. I mean, it is, look, we all walk around the high street. Who wants to see another boarded up public building? Like, nobody does. And if it's a theatre, you're gonna be doubly sad. And that is, it's not only, somebody's put in the chat a question about community groups and so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, lots of theatres are already doing that work in normal. And today's the first day they can officially open in any capacity. Today, they just can't have shows. Loads of theatres do that work already, and with the building shut and with no clear health and safety guidelines, they cannot continue to do that work. And yes, of course, I would be very happy. We could do more of it. We can repurpose our building to run creative workshops for schools. I'd be all about doing that. But I can only do that if I know what the next 18 months is going to look like. I can't just do that willy-nilly, because I don't know what I'm saving money for to recapitalize later, to put into shows, to put into artists. That's the problem. Having no information you know, if I do that, it costs £20,000 just to open the doors of the Unicorn a month. That's like just to clean it and heat it and light it. That's it. So, you know, at the moment, it's irresponsible of me to be opening the building to do that when I don't know whether I've got, you know, what money I've got or who I'm laying off, or, you know, it's very, yeah, it's a muddle.
Yes, thank you. And that was partly in response to Annie Fox, whose question was about the short-term ways in which the spaces can be used or monetized. And that's a very interesting answer. Chris Worthington has a question about funding for small theatres looking to move ahead with digital productions. As I think you commented earlier, you're not getting the money back from the readers or the viewers.
Yeah.
Are there revenues out there? I know.
So everybody, but Chris in particular. I don't. One place that people. So if this is a question about making the work in the first place, I know that the Space, the BBC platform, the Space, have got a kind of pot of money which they are putting into small theatre companies and small companies, like making work in a digital way. So that I know that exists, if that's the question. If the question is how do you monetize digital work, that is, at the moment, it's not a question anybody's like really solved. Now, obviously the Old Vic, who are very glamorous and have Claire Foy and Matt Smith, have monetized their production of Lungs in that way, but that is not open to most people as a meaningful way. You know, not everybody can get two famous people off a TV show. I think you're asking a really, really good question. I mean, we've been really heartened in that Icena, rather than with Anansi, everything's just on YouTube, so anyone can look at it anytime. But with Icena, you have to go through Eventbrite to book a ticket. It's free, but you have to go through Eventbrite to book a ticket. And interestingly, we have received about £4 or £5 per ticket in donations, the equivalent of £4 or £5 per ticket in donations from people through that. Partly, I think, because, you know, it's free, and then the ease of which you can donate is on the same page as you get your ticket. And I think there'll be more models like that, more of a pay what you can digital model. I can see that taking off. But, you know, we at the Unicorn, we're not a huge theatre, but we have, you know, I don't know, I think it's about 50,000 people that we send a newsletter to. So we've got a lot more reach than a small I'm trying to think. I can't remember the name of the theatre in Corby, the Cube, I think it's called. You know, like, they're not going to have 50,000 people that subscribe to it. You know, they'll have like 5,000. So the economics of it will be really difficult to make digital theatre work in that way, I think.
Yeah.
I sound so negative. Honestly, most of the time, I'm like a really cheerful person who only talks about happy things. I feel like I'm sitting here being really miserable. Sorry, everybody.
Well, I think we're painting a very realistic picture, and I hope that anyone with, you know, policy-making power is going to be listening to this and actually acting appropriately and accordingly. It's just been so great to hear your views and thoughts. And if anyone does have any further questions, do pop them in the timeline. We've just got a few minutes left, and we can
just to can I just pick up on Julie's,
of course,
question about writing 1 hour plays and doing stuff in the parks. Can we do stuff now? And I think, of course, as creative people, you know, if we could just go and do a show right there, right now, I think we would be. Again, I think there's two difficulties. One is that all these things have a risk, and theatres are in the business of taking risks. It's what they do. But if they don't know what follows after, it's very hard to calculate that risk. So hiring and paying anyone, even to do the smallest of shows now, without knowing how it fits into at least the next 12 to 18 months, would just be kind of irresponsible. Because if they lose critical funds now, they might need to survive, because the government suddenly said, well, actually, theatres aren't now going to open till April 2021. It'd be very tricky. And secondly, we just don't have the advice from the government how we could do that. We'd love to do a show, an open air show, perhaps for children or something outdoors, but no one's told us how we can safely do that doesn't endanger, again, audience, performers and staff. And I know that sounds a bit sort of, I'm putting up barriers to stuff, but we're in an unprecedented situation. At the end of the day, theatre's never been in this situation before where potentially putting on work is life-threatening. And
well, not since the plague, and they shut all the theatres then. So.
Yeah, I mean, we want to change lives, we want to inspire lives. We don't want to kill anyone. We really don't. And so until we can do it safely, that is the huge problem. So we could be doing. The frustration is, and I know the government's been running around to catch itself, and lots of sectors in trouble, of course. But even with a couple of months ago, had we had some advice, that there might have been some open stuff that could have happened sensibly and safely, but it's too late now.
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's been mentioned already, but like, it is honestly the statistic that by Christmas, 70% of theatres will go bust. I mean, that's bad. I mean, it's bad, it is scary. That is where we're at. Yeah.
And there is a saying in the comments that a big concern is insurance, and that's been a concern in film and TV production as well. Insurers don't really like covering it, and producers don't like funding things without insurance. So we're kind of stuck.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have now reached 4:45, and it's now time to bring the curtain down on this afternoon's event. I'm afraid. Piers and Justin, thank you so much for joining us and for the eloquence and passion with which you have spoken. And thank you to everyone who has tuned in. I'm so sorry for the technical issues.
Live theatre.
Live theatre. All sessions are free, as I said before, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund, that would be much appreciated. And I would just like to also allow you, Justin, to you accept donations as well to Unicorn through your website. I think that's, am I correct in saying?
Yes, we do. That's right. Yeah,
please do.
Yeah, and you're going to be more and more reliant on those. So please do head over if you'd like to support the Unicorn at this time. Join us for afternoon tea tomorrow at 4 with playwright, poet, and cross art form practitioner Inuit Elms.
Oh wow, Inuit, great! Wow.
Yeah. And for more details on this and all our other festival events, including in conversation events with playwrights Barney Norris and Lem Sase, are available on our Vimeo account, but also head to our Society of Authors events page for more information on those. And the link should be appearing in the chat. Thank you so much once again for your support.
Thanks, Theo. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you all. Bye.
Do you continue this conversation on Twitter, and if you would like to do so, the festival hashtag is #SoA@home. Thank you so much.